Welcome to the first OT CyberBytes OT series podcast with Barry Mainz, Forescout CEO. How have you been, Barry?
I'm doing well, and thanks for having me.
Good. No, great to have you. You've been up to much recently?
Yeah, lots of travel, and as you may or may not know, we do quite a business internationally outside of North America. So I always feel like you don't really know until you go, and need to spend time with customers, partners, and prospects, and of course, employees.
Yeah, brilliant. Cool. Well, look, let's get down to it. One thing that we always do with all guests is take it back to the start, and really your individual background. So tell us a bit about that.
How far back do you want me to go?
As far as you see a fit.
Oh gosh. Um, Born and raised in the US, and spent time in California where I grew up. My early part of my career, I spent in sales and marketing, and really where, and I felt, kind of the interest in technology, spending time at Sun Microsystems, and was there the first day we put the Java development kit on the web. And that was crazy, crazy. And so that was a good ride, and spent time in various tech companies. And I think the one tech company where I spent quite a bit of time, when I found very interesting, was a company called Wind River Systems. I ended up being the president CEO and the COO there for quite some time. And we basically were the operating system and middleware for operational technology things and IoT. And that was terrific, gave me a good understanding of OT and IoT. And now we have an IOMT, but all of the various things that you build and connect. And then been spending the last, call it 10 years or so in cybersecurity.
Perfect. Cool. And what sort of got you into Forescout? Where did that come from?
Well, it's interesting, where I was a customer at a previous company, so I knew the technology and we had used them, and our IT folks liked the technology, and it helped us really increase our security posture. And then I went to a private equity firm, Crosspoint, and I was an operating partner there for about 5 months, and the job for CEO opened up, and was a good fit for my skill sets, and also the scale and size was quite nice, and I joined.
Great. Tell me a bit about Forescout and the problem you guys solve.
Yeah, so you can think of Forescout. There's a couple different things. The buyer journey, which is a good way to explain, people use Forescout to kind of do four things. One is, let me take a look at my assets. Can I see my assets? Can you tell me what they are? Like, hey, there's a thing, but is it a television? Is it a camera? Is it a PC? What is that on my device? And then what we do some pretty interesting things about the risk scoring, based on things that we might see on the device. Is that device risky? So the first is asset visibility. Second is a risk profile. Third is, can we give some sort of a detection and response? Can we tell them what to do, what to do? And then the fourth thing would be control. And that all goes into, a network security applications and intelligence framework that we sell to customers.
Great. And where does OT fit in that, Barry?
So when we talk about asset visibility and discovery, these assets could be also operational technology things. So we're talking about industrial, ops processing, equipment. Could be if you're talking about critical infrastructure, could be a water treatment plant, and all the facilities there. So those are the operational technology things. There's another piece too, and we have a bit of a Venn diagram, and that oftentimes these OT networks also have IoT things. So could have cameras also inside, the plant, if you're doing for security, that kind of thing, or, the programmable logic controllers that are in there. So could be a combination of things, especially around critical infrastructure, like an airport, for example. You have lots of OT things and the IoT things tied together.
Great. And obviously Forescout acquired SecurityMatters a little bit before you joined as CEO, but tell me how that's kind of developed once they joined Forescout, and really where that is today.
Yeah, well, first of all, it was back in 2018. So you're right. It was a bit before. I knew this company pretty well, having worked at Wind River And they were doing some very cool things around agentless device visibility. So, for lockdown systems, all the critical infrastructure systems, you can't go put an agent on it. So they had some very, very interesting technology around looking at the network signal, and all devices have a signal that comes back, right? The manufacturer puts it. And so they worked very closely with manufacturers to help understand what that signal said, and then they could report back what it was. And it was a really nice complement to the portfolio, because Forescout was really good at, kind of having, network security and network access control and things and visibility for IT environments. And it was becoming, very, very clear that OT mattered. And so they had a lot of technology. Very interestingly enough, I was there last week, and it's a pretty amazing place. They're in Eindhoven. And the Eindhoven University focuses on embedded control, embedded computing, operational technologies. So it's a really good feeder for the organization there. And, they're really our heart and soul around classification and the OT part of our, software.
Great. And tell me a bit more about OT and the problem that you see as an individual.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. If we just zoom out a little bit, you kind of think about where kind of the state actors or the cyber criminals are going. You start to see them going at these OT devices or OT systems. You can see it at the Colonial Pipeline, for example, is a good one, right? That was ransomware attack. Let's go and figure out. And these systems, and we'll probably talk here in a second about many of these systems have been in the field for so long that these systems, unfortunately, have a lot of, let's say, opportunity for these cyber criminals to exploit. And then they can do a ransomware and something. Okay, so there's that bit. There's the other half, which is the geopolitical dynamic that's going on. And you have, the new, kind of Cold War is a cyber war. And you have the state and nation states attacking vulnerable infrastructure. And this infrastructure is vulnerable. So you have cyber criminals, you have nation state, sort of sponsored, kind of hacking and things. And we look at a social infrastructure, we look at critical infrastructure all around the world. And just due to the nature of how long it sits in the field, due to the nature of, we probably didn't worry about it before, there's risk. And, we see the amount of attacks on critical infrastructure going up. One of the things I didn't mention to you, Ben, was that Eindhoven also has our research lab. It's called Videri Labs, and we compile a lot of information and research around exploits and the types of devices that are being exploited. And we work with many of the United Nations, the US government around exchanging information and sharing information and really mapping out what type of devices. And the reason why I bring this up is that about a year ago, we first started noticing OT and IoT devices and assets that were being exploited in this data. And critical operating systems and critical connectors for operating systems that were truly embedded, truly ones that run these systems, were being exploited. And it was coming up in the top 10, something completely different than what we'd seen in the previous year. So, not only is it risky, we're starting to see the fact-based, wow, it is happening. And then, I guess the next step is really about, okay, what do we go do about it?
Great. Yeah, that was where I was exactly going to lead on to next. What do we as people really need to kind of act on to make a change?
Yeah. So first of all, acknowledging that it may not be our fault because of the people that developed the systems way back when. And hey, I was part of that at Wind River. I worked with all the critical infrastructure companies. And, we didn't know what we didn't know. The exploits from IPv4 to IPv6, which is a protocol for communicating. So maybe it wasn't their fault, but it's all of our problems now, and it will be our fault if we don't think about what to go do. And there's, software and technology that can like Forescouts that can help at least identify which assets are under maybe risky and provide some level of control. And that even happens. I'll just give you a fact. I was looking at something online. I'll get the fact here. In the United States, I don't have the one for Europe, but in the United States, we have 153,000 public drinking water systems and 16,000 public wastewater treatment plants.
Wow.
And many of those, the average, time in field for the OT systems in those infrastructure is like 14 years. So you can see that there's a big risk. Now, the good news is the federal government, the Federal Information Security Modernization Act, FISMA, is doing some things in and around, start to secure a lot of these critical infrastructure and mainly around water and waste management. But just gives you a sense of how big the problem is. Then you multiply that times all the countries around the world. It's a big problem just for drinking and waste management. Think of all the other systems.
Mhm.
So, I think it's identifying out an issue, government's helping if it's critical infrastructure, for example, and then, manufacturing plants thinking about, hey, what do they go do? I see it more and more about coming online with customers I talk to, but it's really understanding that there's, the problem, how big is it, and then what can you do? And
Brilliant.
we can help that.
Yeah, no, I think we spoke about it before, how well developed OT has been in the last 5 years. For the next 5, what do you see next?
Well, I don't think the geopolitical dynamic, we all hope that starts to move in a better direction. But with that, you end up having, maybe the contrast dialed up a bit on the cyber war, unfortunately. I think that I read a really interesting fact this morning, and I wrote it down here, that there's 14 billion IoT, OT in companies and also critical infrastructure, 14 billion. There's going to be 25 billion by 2030. So the attack surface is increasing. So that just makes it more difficult when you've just got more to do. We also know that typically within OT systems, the number of people managing those systems doesn't go up in proportion to the number of devices. So it becomes harder for, let's say, an OT operator to manage things. It just is. So with that, you have a bigger problem over the next 3 years. And like I said before, I don't think the state actors or the cyber criminals, I don't think we're going to have any less, unfortunately. So we've got to think a little bit more about planning. And I'll even tell you this. I met with a grocery store chain and not too long ago, one of the largest ones actually in North America, and I did the same in Europe. And it's interesting to see they're starting to think about, hey, we got a lot of OT systems. You don't realize that in a grocery store, right? All the automated systems, was the doors, whether it's the meat processing plants and the slicing machines and things in the back, or and many of them, like in North America, we have casinos in some of the grocery stores, right? And so the risk associated with not locking those down. 3/4 of the money spent on a casino is digital. So being able to hack in and get stuff is not great. And so, that problem I see where companies traditionally were thinking about just IT, now they're having to think of both, and they're changing the organizations a little bit. You start to see an OT or a COO, OT professional COO in the meeting where you're talking about what is the security strategy and what should we go do, and here's the business problems. You're starting to see a little bit more or a lot more collaboration. I'm not to suggest that OT and IT are converging, but they're starting to collaborate a lot more. And you see in the US, we have a lot of government, like we have the Disclosure Act, for example, that happened about in January, where you're forcing CEOs and CFOs to act on both OT devices and things on disclosure. So if you get hacked, they got to say something in 4 days and what it is once they know. And IT devices, that's driving, at the board level, at the, CEO, CFO level, driving towards their organizations to think about what's their security strategy got to be. And, unfortunately for all of us that are CEOs, and when you move towards a publicly traded company or large enough, you have personal liability. So they can go after you personally. And, I think that's driving a set of accountability and changing our strategy towards, what we're going to go do in our solutions.
Mm-hmm. Talking of the OT problem, there's going to be a big one in 6 weeks, right? When Black Hat goes to Vegas, a lot of those casinos, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Cool. Well, look, to wrap this up, one question I wanted to say, we spoke a lot about the people. and really what we as people can do. But as Forescout, as a business, you must see lots and lots of these startup vendors kind of coming through. What are Forescout doing to basically stay ahead of the curve and stay ahead of the change?
So, we continue to invest a lot. Like I said, we've got, quite a big organization in Eindhoven. We've got, over 100 people there, and they're working on just specific OT and IoT solutions, and our ability to also maintain and manage through the research lab. But I also feel like there's a bigger problem here. It really is, having worked at a company that powered it was Wind River. The ecosystem on how these devices are created, there's a of individual, we call them hops, or individual partners to develop a product that might end up, let's say if you have a industrial robot, for example, there may be 20 systems in there, and those systems, the board comes from Taiwan, and the control software on that board could come from an embedded software company. Then that board goes to a kind of sub contractor that builds a system within the robot. Then the robot gets assembled and goes together, right? It's very fragmented on who owns the problem. And I think that we need to do a better job as an industry to start working together on, okay, let's identify where the failing points are, look at the finite state machine or the if then else on how things are moved around, and look for those failing points. And as a industry, and for the better of people around anyway, because critical infrastructure affects us all, spend a little bit of time on, okay, are there some standards we can actually implement? Are there a set of communication that we can do better on how to solve problems? Could we go and say, hey, let's go and one by one go out to these customers that and as a team, as an ecosystem, and figure out together, maybe there's some things we can do together. Right now we're not doing that as an industry, and I think that unfortunately it's one of those things where you don't know it's broken until someone tells you it is. And I think the industry, the media, everyone's screaming pretty loud, we've got an issue. And as I say, hey, words talk, but numbers scream, and the numbers on the attacks are really high. So we're doing some things in and around now. We're not ready to announce yet, but we're working on a consortia for OT, and we'll be with a set of vendors to figure out, hey, what do we do in lieu of this, especially going back. Got a lot of those legacy systems. Are there things we can think to collaborate with as a group? Could we say, hey, are there some resources we can put together, pinpoint some of the critical infrastructure segments, and figure out, are there better ways of helping them versus kind of sitting on the sidelines? And that's underway. We're not ready to announce that yet, but it's underway, and I think that'll be at least a good step in the right direction to try and own the problem that has been existing for a while, and it affects all of us, especially when we talk about critical infrastructure. We all fly in well, most of us do go to an airport and fly. We ride on trains. We drink water. We have waste management. We have power. We have and on down the road. I mean, it's for all of us, and so we could do a better job as an industry. And the goal of what we're working on with our partners in the ecosystem is really to do a better job of that.
Brilliant. I think that's a great ending of a brilliant podcast, the first ever one of the OT CyberBytes. And look, thanks very much, Barry. And I'm sure everyone, like myself, is very, very excited to see where the journey at Forescout goes, and also the couple of the new bits that you're working on.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Ben. Appreciate the time, and good luck with the rest of your podcasts. I've listened to many of them; they're actually quite good. Keep it up.
Perfect.
Keep it up. Work.
Thank you.